apologetics is taking out the weeds, while evangelism is throwing in the seeds. So, and you basically you're planting, you're throwing in the seed. God is giving the increase, but you're throwing in the seed. Before you do so, you need to take out the weeds.
Remember summer reading lists? This month we're throwing it back with a book list of our own. Father Anthony is interviewing 4 authors about their books across a variety of topics to see how they support and relate to our mission of bringing an ancient faith to a modern world. This week, he interviewed George Bassilios, author of Timeless Truth in Truthless Times, answers to tough questions about God, Christianity, and the Bible.
Welcome to the Bringing an Ancient Faith to a Modern World podcast, where you are in for a treat today. My name is Father Anthony, and today I'll be the one asking the questions, as I'm joined today by a very special guest and someone whose ministry I appreciate more and more every day. But before I introduce our special guest, let me tell you why he's even here. We're doing something fun over the next couple months that we're calling summer reading. Part of bringing an ancient faith to a modern world is understanding more about ourselves, our faith, our church, and the culture that we live in. And I've always found that books are a great way to expand our minds in this way. I'm a big believer that any leader must be an avid reader because that allows us to be discipled and mentored and learn from people that we'll never, ever meet. So that's why we're excited during this summer reading adventure that we're going to take over this next couple months. We're going to interview authors who are passionate about different topics and understand how they're fulfilling their own mission through their writing. So today, I am super excited to welcome Mr. George Bassilios to the podcast. Welcome to the show, George. We're happy that you're here.
Thank you, Atsabuna. I am honored to be with you and in your presence.
Thank you. So for those who don't know George, first of all, where you been? If you don't know George, it means you haven't read his book. But George is a prominent speaker and lecturer in theology and apologetics with over 20 years of experience in the field. He's got degrees in psychology and philosophy from California State University, Hayward. And he's the author of a book, Timeless Truth in Truthless Times, which is such a great title, George. I love that title. And as I said earlier, George is someone whose ministry I truly admire and value, and especially these days as we see more and more people walking away from God, walking away from the church for what I believe are often misunderstandings about the true Christian faith. Okay, so to start us off, George, give us a high-level overview of what it means to be an apologist.
First off, thank you, Father Anthony, for giving me this honor to be with you and in your presence. I've learned so much from you, so this is quite an honor for me. An apologist is someone who engages in the defense of the Christian faith. Simply put, apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which basically means to defend one's position. So Christian apologetics is defending the Christian faith. It's concerned with methods, arguments, which proclaim the truthfulness of the Christian faith. But one important point I want to mention is that apologetics, the intent of it, is not to win the arguments, but to win the soul. That is what Christian apologetics is all about.
I love that point, okay, about how the point is to win the soul, not the argument. That's fantastic. Because so often we do focus so much on, the material that we're discussing or the argument or being right. And that gets me to my next question, which is some people who are listening to this would say, I'm not an apologist. I'm not a theologian. I don't have a background. I don't really care to get involved in it because of a lot of the stuff that I see there. So your book, George, what would you say to the person out there who, I don't have a background in theology. I'm not an apologist. Is your book something that I would understand even? Why should I read your book?
Great question. No prerequisites needed whatsoever. This book the intent, again, was to write this book in a simplified format so that you can just pick it up and read and comprehend how to respond. Again, the intent is to equip you with intellectual ammunitions to enable you to respond to the very challenging questions that come our way, intellectually, scripturally, spiritually. So I wanted to basically use 2 flavors, or I painted the answers with two, types of brush: a logical brush, a logical flavor, intellectual, philosophical, as well as scriptural and biblical. So you don't need to have a theology background to read the book. It's far more simplified than not.
Okay, what would you say to the person who says, you know what, I don't have any questions. I was taught Sunday school when I was young, love God, I pray, I believe. Why do I even need to consider these questions and find answers to them?
Well, even if you don't have questions yourself, it is inevitable that you will be asked questions. I mean, if you interact with anyone in this world, in the academic world, in the world of entertainment, and in your profession, you will be asked questions. You will be challenged. So how can I be equipped intellectually with coherent answers to what I would say to life's existential questions? And these are questions that we all struggle with. Questions like, who created God? What's going to happen to those who haven't heard about Christianity? Why would God create people that he knows beforehand they will perish? Why did he bother creating them? So some questions are inevitable to come up and to challenge us. So, we need to be equipped, again, as I said in the book, with intellectual rigor and grace in responding to these questions.
That's an excellent point. And I'll tell you something that I've seen on this topic as well, is that, a lot of us, maybe our families of origin, grew up in a different time. And they grew up in an age where faith was something that people did accept. And there was a very strong, emotional connection to it. Whereas today, we live in a society and in a culture that very much emphasizes the intellect. So to your point is that we need to be able to match that. And we can't just say, no, you should think the way I think, or you should have grown up the way I grew up, which is just accept it and believe. We need to be prepared, as you're saying, is to match the environment around us, which clearly, where we're living here in the United States of America, is one where people do discuss and there is intellectual, and people need to be stimulated and believe at this level in order for it to get to this level. And I don't think that's necessarily bad.
Absolutely.
It's just how, yeah. So with that, something that's near and dear to my heart into this podcast is the topic of evangelism. What is the connection between apologetics and evangelism? And if you have, maybe a story that you could share about a connection between the two, how apologetics is a part of evangelism.
There's an overlap, as your reverence know. There's an overlap between apologetics and evangelism. I like to use this analogy. I say that apologetics is taking out the weeds, while evangelism is throwing in the seeds. So, and you basically, you're planting, you're throwing in the seed. God is giving the increase, but you're throwing in the seed. Before you do so, you need to take out the weeds. So reactively, in apologetics, you respond to questions by removing intellectual and existential barriers. Proactively, you share the message of the gospel. So they're two sides of the same coin. And interesting story I'll share with you. I was given a lecture at a university here in California, and a bunch of students after the lecture came up and they said, we don't believe in God. We don't believe in Christianity. And here is their issue. Their reason for their unbelief is the problem of evil and suffering. How can a loving God allow all this evil and suffering in this world? We don't believe God exists. So, I try to, again, mix both apologetics and evangelism. And we're commanded to always be ready to give a defense with meekness and fear. These are the two qualifiers: with meekness and fear, and respect and love. So I said, well, let me ask you a question. How can you claim that there is an immoral evil in an amoral world? Because on the worldview of atheism, Where is the objective moral standard coming from? So you can't even diagnose what evil is on an atheistic worldview, let alone provide a solution for evil and suffering. On the Christian worldview, I can tell you what evil is and give you a definition and a diagnosis. And more importantly, I can give you a solution for what evil and suffering is. So, you respond apologetically, and then you throw in the seeds of, well, let me share with you the message of the gospel. Let me share with you the solution for the problem of evil and suffering in this world. And that is an existential question that every single human being, struggles with.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. I got to go back to something that you said. Actually, two things that I wrote down right here. But the first thing is I want to go back and highlight that point. That, as you said at the very beginning, we're caring about the soul, not the argument. Correct. So what an apologist, a true apologist, doesn't do is say, someone says, how can you believe in a God, evil and suffering? And we don't go back and say, these people have no idea what they're doing. And these people, are clearly lost. And these people, and we don't condemn. Okay, that was never Christ's way. It was never St. Paul's way. And a true apologist is, as you said, is not trying to win an argument with those two young men, okay, and convince the world that they're wrong. It's caring about their soul, and I see that with St. Paul in the book of Acts, when he would go to certain people and the unknown God, he's like, I agree with you. There's an unknown God. Let's talk about him. He meets people where they are. That to me is exactly the story that you just shared. You met those young men where they are. And then the other thing that I wrote this one down, I'm going to take this one for a sermon. I'm telling you right now, this is great. That apologetics is taking out the weeds. Evangelism is throwing in the seeds. That is fantastic, because you're right. We're all, again, it's soul. The goal is the soul. Okay, right. So what is it going to take? And for some people, different cultures, we need to focus on, like I said, that emotional connection. But in this culture, we need to remove the weeds on an intellectual level, so that the seeds that we're throwing every Sunday, we're throwing seeds. Every Sunday, every Monday, God is throwing seeds. And every Tuesday, God is throwing seeds. But as you said, the work of an apologist is to remove the barriers and the weeds. And I'll add another level to that is for those who are listening and say, I'm not in discussions and lectures. If you have children, okay, let me tell you, I got two kids in high school. One's going to be in college in a couple of years. And let me tell you, you better be prepared for this if you're going to have children that are going to tackle these things. So yes. Great answer.
I wanted to highlight the fact that apologetics is not about flexing your intellectual muscles to prove someone wrong. Absolutely. That is not the case. It's the motive is nothing other than love. It's because I love you and I love God and I love to connect you both, basically to introduce you to the Lord Jesus Christ and to connect you both. So if the motive is not love to the other, then you're doing a disservice to Christian evangelism. So it's winning the soul and driven out of love.
And it reminds me of a quote. I don't know who it is that said it. That said, a true theologian is one who prays. One who prays is a true theologian. So it's the same, which again, I think this is such an important topic, because the idea of an apologist and theologian sometimes gets a bad reputation, that they're just people who are just mean-spirited. And I even heard a priest say that one time, that the worst people in the church are the seminarians. To which a seminarian was with me said, well, I won't tell you what he said back to the priest. Okay, but he had his opinion on the subject. Let me ask you this question. From your experience and talking to different people, and I'm sure a lot of feedback you've gotten on the book, what's the toughest topic to tackle these days when it comes to apologetics?
That's a good question. I will have to say, to preach exclusivity in an inclusive world, that I would say would be the toughest topic and the most challenging, because we do thrive on diversity and acceptance and tolerance, great qualities, great virtues. But again, and the concept here is that diversity is great on earth. then it must be equally wonderful in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, heaven must be more inclusive than exclusive of different faiths, different religions. So we cannot just say that Christianity is the only truth. That is the most challenging thing, to preach exclusivity of the truth of the Christian worldview in a world that thrives on inclusivity and acceptance. So you have to navigate these rough waters again with intellectual rigor and grace, to preach how truth by nature is exclusive.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, that's not an easy one these days, because for sure,
Absolutely.
There's people out there who want to paint Christianity in an exclusive way, as you're saying, and really in a harsh light because of that diversity. And I remember I heard a bishop talk about this one time, and I don't remember who it was. Talked about in our iconography, there was an icon of the 24 priests in heaven. So Christ sitting on his throne with the 24 elders all around him. And they all looked just like Christ. It's basically, in the image, it's a big picture of Christ, and then little, and they all looked like a little Christ. Okay. It looked like it could have been like his younger brother, and someone was saying, why not diversity in there? Why not different ethnicities? And why not different races? And on the surface, you're like, yeah, because heaven is all not nations, all tribes. But then the bishop was saying, no, an icon, all the attention and all the glory is Christ. And all of us, not swallowed up, not saying it that way, like our individuality is swallowed up in Christ, but in a sense of it's in heaven, we're not looking at each other in our differences as much as we are all in our fulfilling that image and likeness of God. So we reflect his glory and his image, which I thought was so beautiful, that here on earth, we're so focused on, look at me, look at me, look at me. Whereas in heaven, it's not going to be look at me. It's going to be look at him. And we are all little Christ. So, yeah. And a tough question for sure to navigate, because, some people are coming at us with the wrong side. So, yeah, we appreciate it. Okay, let me ask you one more question. Okay, and then I'll give you a chance to tell us a little bit about your book and how we can get it. The question I want to ask you is, in what ways do you think that church communities today can encourage conversations and questions about these tough issues? I'm a priest of a church. I get members of the congregation. They all are busy. They have jobs. They have kids. What can I do as a priest in my community to encourage these kinds of conversations about these tough issues?
Great question. And first, by doing what your reverence is doing now, it's increasing the awareness of what is apologetics and the need for apologetics in this increasingly secular world that we live in, equipping our youth, our servants, our parents with this intellectual ammunition, as I mentioned, augmenting our Sunday school programs and curriculums to include apologetic themes and topics that are relevant to today's challenges. Conferences on apologetics, a weekend conference to discuss nothing but apologetics and defending the faith and responding coherently to challenging questions, training our servants, training our parents on how to dialogue with their children. One of the main challenge here I share with you, Abuna, is that many of the youth come to me and they say, we have questions, but we can't get intellectually satisfying answers. And here's the problem I see is that we can't give faith-based answers to fact-based questions. If I'm asking you a question that has to do with truth, fact, data, you cannot give me a faith-based answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that there's a need that needs to be addressed. I must speak to my child's heart, but I cannot neglect their mind. Mm-hmm. So, and especially in this day and age. So doing what I mentioned, augmenting our Sunday school curriculum, conferences on apologetics, equipping and educating and training. I think this is It's inevitable in this to do this in this day and age if we want to maintain and keep and protect our children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, like you took certain words right out of my mouth. One of the things, I actually did a series earlier this summer, and it was called I Want to Know. And it was just basically answering 4 questions that I think people are asking. And what I said in the beginning of that series is, I think a lot of people are leaving God and leaving the church because they're getting bad answers to good questions.
Absolutely.
And as you said, the questions are valid. And there's nothing wrong with someone asking. And we need to get rid of the mindset of like, no, don't ask. And you should just believe and stop asking questions. Because what I discovered is when you tell someone to stop asking a question, they will. But the reason is because they've already made up their mind on the answer. It's not that they've come to the conclusion that you wanted them. They came to the conclusion that A, you probably don't know either, or B, you don't even care to figure it out. Okay, right. Which either way says, why should I? So
right.
This has been great. I'm going to ask you, actually, I thought of another question I want to ask you. All right. And before I wrap us up right here, but since I got you, I got to ask you, because every time I meet someone who I respect and learn from, I always ask this question. Tell me one book that you're reading this summer. Okay. And tell us something that maybe you have benefited from that we can enjoy, in addition to your book, of course.
All right. In addition to the excellent, wonderful book by Reverend Father Anthony Massad, Whatever God, which is an excellent book. And I thank you so very much for writing such a wonderful, practical, and I underline that word, practical book on spirituality. I have 2 boys. So I have, all the parenting tips and tricks I can get. I'm reading this book, Parenting Towards the Kingdom. Orthodox Christian Principles of Child Rearing by Dr. Philip Mamalakis. And it's a great book for parents that's filled with, again, practical tips and tricks. And the other book that I'm reading, I know you asked for one, but the other book I'm reading by Father John Mack, Ascending the Heights, A Layman's Guide to the Ladder of Divine Ascent. So these are 2 books that I started one and I'm about to finish the other. So I'm working on this summer.
Okay. Good tips for sure. Good tips for sure. Now, okay, let me tell you guys about, George's book is right here. It's called Timeless Truths, Answers to Tough Questions About God and Christianity in the Bible. George, tell us where people can get your book after we finish the show.
Sure. The timelesstruth.org. That's the website of the book. www.timelesstruth.org. And the book is actually translated in Arabic and French, so you can get the Arabic copy, and you have the English, and the French is coming soon.
That's great to hear that it's going into different languages. Well, let me tell you, everyone out there, you need to get a copy of this book. The best thing about it, okay, in addition to the content, which is great, honestly, you did a great job, George, of really breaking it up where each chapter is kind of its own question. So you don't look at it as a 200-page book that you need to sit and start from cover to cover. You can just grab this thing and go straight to the question, okay, that may be on your mind. Grab it with you, take it on the beach. This is great for discussions. Like I said, if you have teenagers, which, I got 2 teenage kids, we've used this in our Sunday school, some of the topics. So George, we really, really, really appreciate your time and joining us here. And as I said, personally, I really appreciate your ministry. The more and more that I deal with people, like I said, who are leaving the church, the more and more I think it's really, thanks be to God that we got people like you who are doing what you're doing. So keep up the good work, keep fighting the good fight. And as I said, hopefully we were talking before, is that we'd love to get a chance to see you here if you're ever on the East Coast for a visit.
God willing. Thank you, Abuna, so much. It's again, as I said, it's an honor to be in your presence. And God bless your ministry, Abuna, and thanks once again.
Thank you so much, George. And thank you all for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Be sure to join us next time as we continue our summer reading series, and we will chat again. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
To listen to previous episodes or access all of our free resources, join the community at stsaministries.org.